This is the Chuck Says Words podcast with your host, Chuck Jackson, a show dedicated to navigating the complex world of building a service-based business, finding and leading successful teams, and not getting in your own way. Whether you are bootstrapping or have a plethora of investment cash, business is hard. So if you're ready to explore ways to make it easier, hear some wild stories, and walk away with some great anecdotes, then join us. This is where Chuck Says Words. Now, your host, Chuck Jackson.
Welcome to the Chuck Says Words podcast. I'm your host, Chuck Jackson. I am the founder, CEO of a small boutique consulting firm, 9 Mitchell Consulting. You can find us on the web, 9mitchell.com, or search for us on LinkedIn, 9 Mitchell Consulting. You can also hunt me down on LinkedIn, Chuck Jackson. You'll find me pretty high up on that one. And what we do is really help healthcare and human service providers do the administrative side, compliance side, business side of healthcare or whatever sect of human service they're in better. That's our whole goal, is to make that side of the business easier so that the providers we work with can focus on giving the best possible treatment they can give, right? So that's what we do. And what this podcast is about is really highlighting the things out there in the industry that our clients and the people we work with and our colleagues and we experience on a day-to-day basis, right? And we just kind of explore some of those problems, some of those hassles, some of the changing trends in the industry and whatnot. And you know, it's early yet in our podcast life, but hopefully we'll be able to put together some good content out there that any of our future listeners or current listeners even can really benefit from, right? And in our first episode last week, I made mention that we're going to have 2 pieces of every show at least, and this is before we get to all of our interviews that we plan to have in the future once we build a little bit of a listenership and people actually want to show up and come to the show, right? No one wants to be interviewed on a podcast that doesn't have any listeners. So hopefully we're able to find a little bit of listenership and start getting some really interesting people on the show. But what the 2 things we're going to talk about is we're going to go through a little case study. We're going to talk about something that's out there in the industry, maybe something that somebody did that they shouldn't have done, as a representative of what not to do. Or maybe we're going to look at something that somebody has done that is outstanding that we think maybe more providers, more human service providers out there would benefit from considering or doing or changing, right? And last week we talked a little bit about Virginia Mason up in Washington State and some stuff that they did to be able to eliminate waiting rooms and whatnot. This week's case study is actually going to be talking about Princeton Medical Center, which is a part of Penn Medicine, and what they did in their medical center when it came to patient rooms, right? And I have it up on the screen, so just so I can reference a few things. But when we're talking about a general medical center, right, we're talking about, depending where you live and how old your hospitals are, or the different medical clinics that you might go to and stay overnight at, depending how old they are, you might be familiar with 2 patients per room, 4 patients per room. You have the sliding curtains that you can use. Sometimes you're sharing a television. In some places you have dueling televisions. And I think, if we've ever been in a facility that has more than 2 or more people in a room with dueling televisions with nothing between you except a hanging sheet, and then you probably have a good idea as to how frustrating it can get in there. People are always listening to what's going on with you. You're listening to what's going on with them. And generally speaking, double plus occupancy in any type of hotel room, hospital room, is far from being like in a hotel, right? And over the years, what we've started to see, at least in the industries we focus most in, which don't get to the hospital level, but we're talking smaller inpatient facilities. We work with a lot of detox centers, behavioral health inpatient facilities, where the stay is usually a little bit longer than a hospital. One of the trends that we've been seeing in the industry lately is to have more of a focus on individual patient rooms, or if it is double occupancy or more, being able to give each of the patients that are in that room a little bit more of a a private experience, right? And a Princeton Medical Center, actually, in my opinion, as a just representative example of what you can do if you really give some thought into it and you're creative about your construction and the materials you use and the apparatus that you put in there, that you can really have a forward-thinking patient experience, right? And so let me run through a couple of the things that they've done that I think are just really representative of the direction that the future of healthcare in the U.S. is really going, right? So it starts off with just some things that they do. And the first thing that they do is they feature all single patient rooms. And every patient room is what they refer to as a canted room design, which instead of just walking into a square or a rectangular room with the patient bed headboard against the wall with a window, say, on one side on your left and then the door on your right, and you have your TV in the front and the patient bathroom over by the main doors, they do something called canted room design, which actually tilts everybody a little bit. About maybe, they don't say it on here, but as I look at it, it's probably about 25, 30 degrees towards the window, so that instead of the window being 90 degrees perpendicular to, say, my left, your right, wherever, now you're aiming towards a little bit. And the way that they built it out is there's actually a window behind you as well in the large majority of rooms. So now you have all of this natural light around you, which if you're familiar with the behavioral health world, it's not uncommon in a behavioral health inpatient unit that natural light is really hard to come by. And part of that comes from the need to have inoperable windows, which means many times you have smaller windows, because on a behavioral health unit, a psychiatric unit, a lot of times the reason that people are there is because they might be a harm to themselves or others, and so you want to minimize the opportunity to jump out a window, break the window, so in the behavioral health psychiatric world, that's not uncommon. In a lot of hospitals, the higher up you get, you really can't open windows. And so the oldest facilities I've been in, a lot of times those windows are very, very narrow. Even if you can just open them and tilt them a little bit, you don't get a lot of natural light in there. It's all overhead lighting or wall recessed lighting, maybe. And it's really something that was never taken into consideration for the longest time in hospital or inpatient facilities. And so it's really interesting to see. And, one of the things we'll do is, if you're watching the video version of this, is we'll do our best to maybe put up a couple of pictures of this website that I'm looking at where they talk about it. But this canted room design, so that you can get the natural light behind you and you're actually more oriented towards the light, is just a really outstanding idea. One of the things that they did inside of the single patient rooms is there is something that they refer to as the family zone, right? And so what the family zone is, and in the picture of the room that I'm looking at right here, the way the orientation is you walk in on your right-hand side. If you're laying in the bed, your headboard's behind you, TV's in front of you, and to the left, you've got a couple of what look to be fairly comfortable chairs and a couch that actually folds out into an actual bed. So if you have family that's staying overnight, they actually allow that. There's a comfortable place for that person to stay, which is just outstanding, right? But it's also ample seating. So if you've got a wife or a husband or a brother or a sister and kids and parents, maybe, this gives an opportunity for the average person, maybe 5 seats for family, which is just outstanding, right? That's a very hard thing to come by. And anyone that's ever been into a double occupancy or more patient room, you're probably really, really familiar with the idea that you have a chair, if you're lucky. It's tiny and it's crammed in a corner, usually by the head of one of the beds, and you're right up against the heater in the room, and it's really just not meant to be that comfortable. So that's really exciting, is the family room, the family zone inside the room. They have outfitted every single room with a 42-inch flat screen TV. It's got all the jazz. Underneath it, they also have a work desk. It's not big. It's not like a hotel style desk. It's just built out of the wall. There's a little whiteboard there so that the staff can write notes on it. Your family can write notes on it. You can write notes on it, whatever it be. There's raised outlets for the light above the whiteboard and for any jacks you might need, whether it be Ethernet or your outlets, actually, your power outlets. They're all raised and above the desk. Now, the TV actually has access to something that they call the patient engagement system, which provides entertainment and educational features, but you can also check out things like the patient handbook, learn about some hospital safety things, learn about what services exist for patients there. So that's really exciting, right? You can also take a look at the menus for both patient and guest meals and what's the cafeteria serving and what's available to you. Every room has an in-room closet. It looks more like a double-decker cabinet built into one of the walls. If you've ever gone to any of the modern facilities that do any type of imaging, CT scans, MRIs, or anything like that, you might actually be very familiar with what these look like. Is you'll go in there and the top will be a cabinet and the bottom will be like a receptacle where you can put your used scrubs or gowns that you had just used for the imaging. So that's generally what it looks like. Every room also has a in-room computer terminal. It is on one of the hospital-style mobile carts, but patients have patients don't have the use to this. If I understand correctly, and it's a little fuzzy on. I was looking up a little information on this. It's a little fuzzy, but it looks like both staff and patients and family can access this. I don't know how they go about accessing it and how the difference would be for a patient or a family member accessing it versus the staff member accessing it. Because remember, there's always confidentiality and privacy concerns and things of that nature. But it looks like it is usable by anyone that's in the room. Then there's this is one of my favorite ones, and anyone that has worked in the industry through COVID knows that this is a big one. Hands-free sink. Just everything. You don't have to touch anything to wash your hands. Soap dispenser, the water itself. And I know we're all getting used to that in a lot of modern restrooms wherever we go out and whatnot, but that's actually a really impressive thing in a lot of patient rooms these days, because if it's of any kind of age, chances are you still have knobs that you need to turn. Let's see, what else they have? Oh, this is the biggest one. This is actually the thing that I was conversing with a colleague out there, and this was the thing where they said, you know what, it's been done. And so I had to go and look it up because, they pointed me towards Princeton Medical Center for this, and that was individual room temperature controls, which might not sound like that big of a thing, but anyone who has ever dealt with the mechanical aspect of an inpatient or a hospital floor, even an outpatient floor unit, you understand that managing the temperature is very, very difficult. You have cold spots, you have hot spots, your HVAC might not pump hard enough to heat up fast enough, or keep a temperature above a certain level. And if you've lived in any of the colder states in the U.S., you know that this is even a bigger issue, especially when there could be drastic climate changes day to day. And the last few years, I spent a lot of time in the Rochester, New York area, and it's not uncommon where the heat will be on one day because the high temperature that day is 51 degrees, and the next day, for whatever reason, is 78, and now you're dealing with the heat still being on, and now you have to turn it off, and just it can wreak havoc, especially when you have multiple floors, multiple units, cold spots, dead spots, whatever it be. So when I saw that they had individual temperature controls in every single room, that was impressive. One of the things that they also do is make sure that every HVAC system they have has all of the right HEPA filters and whatnot, so that they can make sure that they're filtering air and making sure that it is doing everything they can to reduce infection. They have sound absorbing materials to reduce the noise so that you can't hear people in the hallway very easily, or people in the hallway can't hear what's happening in your room that well. And that's through a combination of the design that they use, having more porous materials and a little bit of sound batting between rooms. So that's pretty outstanding. Everything that they do also considers the antibacterial aspect of reducing infections. Let's see what else they have. Your pretty standard safety things. They have private bathrooms. They have handrails. They use a sliding bathroom door instead of a hinged door, which, if anyone is familiar with the difference in those, a hinged door in a patient room can frequently open. It will frequently open out into the room, and it can cause grief getting in and out of that room. So the sliding door, that's exciting. Let's see what else we got. They're very mindful of the lighting throughout, and they talk about this a lot on this website. They use different they don't necessarily use skylights, but they use light boxes with different patterns and whatnot. So it gives you more light, and it seems less institutional, not the intense halogen or incandescent lighting that you might have in a normal hospital wing. And then the last thing that they talk about in here is quote unquote patient-centered beds, but really what that is, those are just hospital beds that have easier to understand and operate controls. So you don't have to be a medical professional to understand what button does what and moves your head or moves your feet or anything like that. So overall, I mean, it might not sound like an awful lot, but when you're trying to be patient-focused in your delivery of care, this is a really good example of how you can really think from the patient's perspective on the things that they would want and need. And I think it's worth it to everybody to go and take a look. So, go hit the Google and type in Princeton Medical Center patient rooms, and you will find their website where they talk about it, and they give a lot of pictures. Again, we're going to try and post to edit and throw in a couple of pictures from this so that you can see what we're talking about. But if you end up viewing this on YouTube or wherever we might have the video. But just think about that, right? Like, you're running a facility, whether you're outpatient, whether you're inpatient, doesn't really matter. It's not just a matter of patient rooms. What kind of patient-forward design can you do in your facility? Even if you're an outpatient primary care specialty care provider, what types of things can you do in your exam rooms to make your patients more comfortable and really provide that best possible experience, right? So, just some food for thought. I really thought that this was a really interesting case study on how a group will go out of their way and give up a little bit of square footage per person so they can't cram as many people into all the beds, but they're giving a better experience. And if you're in an area with multiple competing facilities for patients, this is the type of stuff that will determine whether or not you get patients to come and do their elective procedures with you. And that is how much more awesome is the experience they're going to get with you than with a competitor. So go look them up, Princeton Medical Center, and part of Penn Medicine, and take a look at their patient rooms. Really outstanding stuff. Let's see. All right. So moving on to our tip of the show, right? This one actually came up because we had this I and my team have had this conversation no less than 15 times in the last 3 weeks at this point. And that is when you're creating your entity, right? All the rage these days, it seems, let's create an LLC. One person, two people. Let's even talk about LLCs as holding companies. That's a pretty wild thing, right? We create one LLC that owns another LLC. Maybe that one owns a third LLC. Maybe two of them each own part of a third, and just all these combinations. And LLCs are great, right? They're limited liability companies, and they do a really good job on what they're meant to do, and that is to separate you personally from anything that could go wrong in your business. And so your liability will not extend in most cases to your personal assets. But what about corporations? Well, if you're not familiar with them, a corporation is not just a corporation, is not just a corporation. There's for-profit, there's not-for-profit. If you ever want to be a 501c3 nonprofit, you have to be a corporation. That's the only way you can really go about it. Now, there is a difference between an S corp and a C corp, and I don't want to get too deep into the basics of this, but a C corp is the type that you would have to be if you end up wanting to be publicly traded on one of the exchanges. An S corp, on the other hand, you hear all the time the argument, the LLC versus the S corp. Well, I've got some interesting news that the internet is not the easiest place to find when it comes to this. And an S corp in and of itself is not its own entity. An S corporation, is actually an elective tax status. So you can be an LLC and elect to be taxed as an S corporation. And when you do that, you will find no shortage of TikToks and Instagram Reels and all that jazz on it. Whatever social media that you're interested in, you'll find people talking about this all the time. So I'm not going to go into the tax part of it, but what I am going to do is give you just some very basic information. You don't need to be a corporation to be taxed as an S corp, but you do have to be owned by individuals. If you go to the IRS website and you look up the requirements to be taxed as an S corp, you will find very simple to follow instructions, which I think we can all agree you don't necessarily see on the IRS website. But this form that you would have to file, a 2553, talks very, very clearly about the criteria to be an S corp, to be taxed as an S corp. One of those is you can only have a maximum number of investors, which I'll look this up. I want to say it's 100, but it could be more than that now. Let's see. S corp, max shareholders. Now, another important thing is they all have to be individuals. Yep, it looks like it's still 100. So you can't have any more than 100 shareholders. They all have to be American citizens, and the shareholders have to be human beings. They can't be other holding companies. So that's one of the things that sets the S corp apart from the C corp, right? Now, you have all these American citizens, and they're all shareholders of your corporation if you're an S corp. Well, what if you're an LLC? It's a very similar thing. Your LLC has to be individual human being managed, member managed. And so what that looks like is me, Chuck Jackson, and let's just take one of my staff, Corey Brown, who you'll get to meet on the show eventually. We decide we want to partner and become the two members of an LLC. Well, we can elect to be taxed as an S corp because we are individual owners. But if our company, 9 Mitchell Consulting LLC, decides to go and buy into another LLC, and so one of the members / owners of the new LLC is 9 Mitchell Consulting LLC, we would not be eligible because 9 Mitchell Consulting LLC is not a human being. So I say all that to say this. The argument, the discussion out there about should I be an LLC or an S corp, that's not the discussion you're having. What you're having is, am I an individually owned? Am I owned by individuals? 1, 2, 5, 10, doesn't matter. LLC, or am I a corporation with 100 or less individuals as shareholders? If I'm either of those, I can elect to be taxed as an S corp. Right? So it's not LLC versus S corp. It's LLC versus corporation, and what type of corporation, an S corp or a C corp. So just be mindful of that out there. I'm certainly not giving tax advice. That's why I didn't go into any of the explanations as to why one is better than the other. You can find that information, like I said, all over the place. There's no shortage of CPAs and business owners and everyone and their mother trying to give you their opinion. What I will say is this. Just know it's not one or the other. You can be an LLC being taxed as an S corp. So it's not just LLC versus S corp. Right? So that's the big tip, is to understand the entities that you're trying to form and what the tax ramifications are. Do your research. Know the difference. Because if you're looking for investors, it's going to matter. If you're an individual member, a single member LLC, it's going to matter. If you want to go the holding company route, it's going to matter. Okay, so there's really no one size fits all when it comes to forming your entity. Just know there's a few different ways that you can do it. What's the old phrase? There's more than one way to skin a cat. When it comes to forming your entity, there is more than one way to skin a cat. So with that, you've heard our case study for this week, our tip of the day, know your entity type. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at 9mitchell.com or on LinkedIn. You can find me, Chuck Jackson, on there. You can also search 9 Mitchell Consulting, and you'll find us there as well. And just ask us some questions. We engage with folks all the time. You can ask us a question, send a message, whatever. We will answer your questions. We don't hide the answers to your basic questions behind a paywall. Yes, there might be an opportunity for some of us to work together in the future, and that's great, and we'll do a discovery call and we'll figure out what your needs are and do that. But if you have a basic question, ask us. We love having those conversations because we believe on our team that it's more important that you do things the right way than to either do them not at all or be afraid to ask because you might get charged. Come ask us the question. We'll put you in the right direction. All right, so with that, again, I'm Chuck Jackson. This is the Chuck Says Words podcast, and thanks for listening. Hopefully we'll get an opportunity to see you in the future. Thanks.